1. We're here for a continuation of closing arguments this morning. Will the parties present state their appearances for the record?
Good morning, Judges. State appears by Calumet County DA Ken Kratz, Assistant Attorney General Tom Fallon, Assistant DA Norm Gahn appearing as special prosecutors. And this is a little loud, Judge.
I see that. Good morning as well. Stephen Avery is present again, and Jerome Buting and Dean Strang standing for him.
All right, before we bring in the jury and continue with closing arguments, there was one matter I wanted to clarify for the record. During the course of these proceedings, we have had some individual voir dire with the jurors, and I wanted to clarify the court's understanding that neither party is asking that any of the jurors be excused for cause based on any of the information adduced at the voir dire. Mr. Kratz?
That's correct, Judge.
Mr. Strang?
That is also correct.
Very well. Is there anything else the parties wish to take up outside the presence of the jury before we resume with closings?
No, Judge.
No, sir.
All right, we'll bring the jurors in at this time. You may be seated. Good morning again, members of the jury. At this time, we're ready to resume closing arguments. Mr. Strang will be speaking first on behalf of the defense.
Thank you. Good morning. And good morning. You know, what's it been, 5 weeks or the 6th week or whatever it's been, and the rules within which we operate fundamentally allow me only to speak at you. At this point, I'd be ready to speak with you. I can't exactly, but I do want to do my best to talk with you this morning. Can't hear? Kind of soft? I'm number 7. See if that, okay, I'm getting nods. Anyway, you hear me whether you want to or not. I want you to step back just a little bit here, and let's try to work at assembling a bit what you might do in approaching your task. And you've got such a mass of information, really, over the last 5 weeks, let's call it. There are some things you are not going to be able to do, I think, but there are also some things you can do. And I want to talk about what I see as the line between those things. You unfortunately are not going to be able to solve a murder here. And I say that for this reason. If Stephen Avery did it, if he's the guy who murdered Teresa Halbach, then in a sense, you're not going to solve that. They already think that. This is the person they think all the evidence points to. It's the person they've identified as doing it. You can agree or disagree with that theory of prosecution. But fundamentally, you and I aren't solving a murder, because if Stephen Avery didn't do it, we can't tell you who did. Jerry Buting, Jerome Buting in court, is not going to tell you. It doesn't mean to tell you that, for instance, Bobby Dassey murdered Teresa Halbach. We don't mean to tell you that someone else murdered Teresa Halbach. It's really kind of the point. So we don't have a police department. You don't have a police department. We're not going to be able to solve the murder if Stephen Avery did not do it. So, you can agree with the state, you can agree with the defense, but at some level, you're not solving the murder, much as it's natural for all of us to want to do that. A second thing I think you're not going to be able to do, I'm quite certain you're not going to be able to do, is bring Teresa Hall back through that door, or better yet, back through the door of her mom's house. We are not going to be able to do that. Convicting a guilty guy, convicting the person who killed her, wouldn't do it. Convicting someone who didn't kill her certainly won't do it. The life that was before October 31, 2005 never will be lost. It's etched in Mom's heart. It's etched in her brothers' and her sisters' minds, in their memories, in the people they are. That life is not lost. The life that could have been, going forward, beginning November 1, 2005, is forever lost. Not forgotten, but lost. This is human tragedy, and if you or I understood why people have been killing each other since we crawled out of caves, we'd stop it. But somebody killed this woman, and that life going forward is lost. You can't get it back. I can't get it back. The gentleman at this table can't get it back. The other thing I think that you're not going to be able to do, you can't do, 13 people, 12 people can't do, is we can't provide closure here in any real meaningful way. It's not what courtrooms are good for. You'd like to be able to do that for Teresa Halbach's family. I think you'd like to be able to do that for Stephen Avery's family. Provide some closure. Provide it for him, for crying out loud. You'd probably like to do that too, if you could. But there again, the time since November 2005 really fundamentally is lost as a matter of closure for Stephen Avery. He's never really, in the broader public, been presumed innocent. He's never really had the presumption to which he was entitled as an American, as a citizen accused. You folks may be the only people in the world, other than those of us at my table, who do presume him innocent. He can't do anything about it. We can't do anything about that for the rest of the world. And as I say, courtrooms are pitiful, pathetic places to try to provide closure for Dolores, closure for the Halbach family. Not that it's not important that the system not work. It is important that the system work. Because when it works, we can provide justice, or some semblance of justice. But justice and closure are two different things. Nobody's always happy with justice or at peace necessarily with justice. And in that sense, closure would be something more personal for that family and for this family and for Stephen. You'd provide it if you could. I know you would. You won't be able to do it. And in some ways, you're going to be told, that you ought not try to do any of these things. Because I think Judge Willis will tell you, after the lawyers are done speaking at long last, I think he'll tell you that you've got to decide this case as finders of fact, without sympathy, without prejudice, without passion, without all the things that might go into solving murders or providing closure. You'll be told instead that you can't be swayed by sympathy or prejudice or passion. But there are some very important things that you can do here. Now that I've identified the things you can't, there are some very important things you can do. You can honor your oath. You can keep a promise that you made before the world, more importantly, that you made for yourself, where you put your own conscience on the line. You can honor the oath that you've taken and that you will take as jurors. You can obey the oath. That's no small thing. You're under an enormous amount of pressure, internally and externally. This table, my table, a courtroom full of people, a community at large, terribly serious issues for everybody. So when I say you can honor and obey your oath, it's a big deal. You also can apply the law honestly and courageously. It's part of what you're duty-bound to do as the judge delivers the law to you in the form of those jury instructions. You can apply that. You can decide this case, if you choose, on the evidence in the courtroom, and only the evidence in the courtroom. You have the power to do that. You have a duty to do it, but more importantly, you have the power to do it. You get to make the choice to do that. It's something you can do. You can decide whether allegations have been proved beyond a reasonable doubt in considering all of the evidence. I don't take it for granted that jurors do that in the end, because jurors are all human, just like I am. But if you choose to do that, you can. It's within your grasp. And I think finally you can, if you choose, you can get it right. In the limited parameters available to you, you can get it right. You can go home whenever you're done and say, I know in my head, because I used my head. I know in my heart, because I used my heart. I know in my conscience, because I listened to my conscience, that I got it right. You can do that. And if you do, you will also have said it right. Just as I said I was going to ask you when I spoke in opening statement, when it was about 19 below zero outside, or whatever it was that day. You'll set a lot of things right if you get it right here. The 1985 case won't matter so much anymore if justice is done this time. Will that ever go away? No, but it just won't matter so much anymore, the injustice that was done to Stephen then, because there is something redemptive in human beings going back and trying again and getting it right eventually. So I want to ask you simply to commit to doing the things you can do and to living with, reconciling yourself to the things you can't do. You're not going to solve a murder, but you may spare someone who's not a murderer. You're not going to bring Teresa Hallback back to her family. But at some level, just by this trial ending, you can give her back to her family. And what I mean by that, I mean, for crying out loud, what an artificial thing we do. And I love this. I love being a lawyer. I love it. But what an artificial, strange thing it is that we do here. Rules of evidence, formal procedures, and for crying out loud, right down to taking body parts and putting exhibit numbers on them. Displaying a person's phone records on a screen for a room full of strangers to look at. It is what we do. It's what we have to do here at some level. Clinical discussions of death. Dry discussions of who you're calling or who's calling you on your cell phone, just for example. It's important. It's necessary. But when this trial ends with a just verdict, although you can't bring her back, in some ways you can give her back. We can be past that. And remember the Teresa Hallback who was, rather than the 15 loci of her DNA. You won't give closure, but maybe you can create an opening. If not closure, an opening when we finish this trial for people to get out of these pews, out of these uncomfortable pews, go back about their lives, and in church and in community and wherever the heck people hang out, in family rooms, there pursue closure. And the sense of restoration or reconciliation that we find or seek in places other than courtrooms with uncomfortable pews to sit in. So maybe as you finish this case, although you can't give closure, maybe you can give the opening for it. How do you undertake, then, to do the things that you can do? You got all these witnesses. It was helpful for Mr. Kratz to give you pictures of the witnesses so you can associate the face with the name again. But much more fundamentally, how do you assemble and assimilate this massive information and approach it in a practical way? You can't do it by hoping the DNA will tell you a story. Unfortunately, for example, DNA doesn't tell stories. People tell stories. People have stories. DNA is submicroscopic bits of protein. Mine's a little different than yours, but fundamentally we're all about 99.9% the same, probably. It doesn't tell a story. It doesn't tell why someone did something. It doesn't tell when it got where it got. If a human being made a mistake with the DNA, it doesn't tell you anything at all about whether it should have been here or wasn't here or whatnot. It doesn't tell you a story, unfortunately, although it makes good rhetoric in a closing argument. So what you have to do in the end is you have to look and listen to people here. even when they're talking about science or filling their liquid propane truck or whatever. In this process, to do your job, to do the things you can, you've got to look at pretty intently on the witness stand and listen to people. And you've got to sort out who you believe and who you don't in the end. So I want to at least suggest that you ask two very basic questions here as a framework, a possible framework for getting at the things you can do here, if you choose. First question. He says he's innocent. Anybody can say they're innocent. Back at the time, before you were around, before anybody was really looking at him, you might ask first, was he doing the things that an innocent person might do? As you look back at it, was he behaving like an innocent man? That's one question you could ask in sort of approaching this whole mass of evidence. A second question you might ask yourself is, for the law enforcement professionals and the prosecutors, primarily the state employees and state witnesses, let's call them law enforcement people generally, the ones who are so convinced he's guilty, back before they got here, were they behaving as honest people acting in good faith do? You could ask yourself that question again as sort of a framework for approaching this mass of evidence. Back before they knew you were going to look at them, as you see it now, were they behaving honestly? Were they acting in good faith? Now, these are just two suggestions, just some lawyer's idea. You can go about this whatever way you want. But this might be helpful. And ask yourself, as to the folks who think Stephen Avery's guilty, do you believe them in the end? And believe them to a level that you would not even pause or hesitate when called upon to act in the most important affairs of life. That's language right out of this reasonable doubt instruction that you got. I've just taken a part of it and sitting on your chairs or wherever your instructions are. You don't have to pick it up and look at it now, but you'll find that. It's sort of, I think it's helpful, practical guide in deciding whether something's proven, whether you believe it beyond a reasonable doubt. It's, would you, given the information you have in the end, would you pause or hesitate in the most important affairs of life? There's no getting around that this is one of the most important affairs of your life, of your lives. A young woman is dead for no conceivable good reason, and a man's on trial for doing it. Enormous consequences. To Mrs. Halbach and everybody who loved and cared about this young woman, brothers, sisters, friends, uncles, aunts, you name it, and to Mrs. Avery, whose own story is tragic. And to the people who fought for his innocence, to the handful of people who believed him before the rest of the world finally got it right, who went through all that, Mrs. Avery, and then 2 years later to have this come crashing down on her. This is an important affair. And it is for you now, too. So, Let me start with my first question. Did he behave as an innocent man might behave? Let's go back. Let's go back to roughly October 2005. What's he doing? What's Stephen Avery doing? Well, he's living in a trailer that he borrowed from Rollie Johnson. That's pretty modest. But it's a damn sight better than a prison cell that he'd been in. He's got himself a girlfriend. He's working in the family business. This is all honest stuff so far. He has a lawsuit started for a whole lot of money based on, he's got two indisputable points on his side in that lawsuit. One, he was innocent of the earlier case, but he rotted in prison for a while anyway. So, he's innocent, but he went to prison. He's got two pretty good starting points in a lawsuit in getting some money, and that's what he's got two other lawyers pursuing for him back in 2005. He's got his mom and dad back. I don't mean to be ignoring Alan, but when I speak of Dolores or anybody else, his niece Carla, he's got his family back is the point. And as this case starts to take shape, as Teresa gets reported missing, and they find out that she had a photo shoot out at the Avery property, the very night, November 3, she's reported missing. Sergeant Colburn comes out to the property, bumps into Stephen Avery. Stephen's not expecting the police. There's no way he would have even known she'd been reported missing at this point. Bumps into Sergeant Colburn, and he's cooperative. By Sergeant Colburn's own account. He's cooperative, he's open, talks to Sergeant Colburn. Doesn't say, I'm not talking to you, The next morning, same thing. And Detective Remacher and Lieutenant Link come out to visit him. He's cooperative. Cooperative to the point of saying, you can come into my house when they ask. Go ahead. You can come to my house. I think it's later on Friday, November 4th, when David Beach comes and, has the poster, wants to put the poster up. This is Teresa's relative, nice younger guy who testified, I think, the first day of testimony. And David Beach has a conversation with Steve Avery, and Steve is forthright, he's calm, he appears concerned, according to Mr. Beach. To me, this is useful because at that point he's not posing. He's not in a courtroom. He doesn't know how this is all going to play out. These are people who are seeing him real, if you will, just having encounters with him, and this is their take on what they're getting from his behavior and what he says. Is he behaving like an innocent man? Well, he has Teresa Halbach's cell phone number. We get a glimpse of her. She's obviously willing to give this out. She says so in the voicemail message. She leaves her cell phone number in the voicemail message. You may have caught that she leaves on the Yonda voice or answering machine. And Steve has her cell phone number. He's got it written down in two places in his house. They're on his computer desk somewhere. They're there on November 5 when the police descend and the Avery people get excluded from the property and the police have it for a week. They're there. He hasn't destroyed her cell phone number, hasn't hidden it, tried to get rid of it. It's there in not one but two places. So, I don't know, if you can burn a cell phone and if you can burn an A310 digital PowerShot camera, I don't know why you can't burn 2 pieces of paper that have a cell phone number on it. That's not what he does, obviously. There was a van for sale. Heaven knows there was a van. You saw about 10 pictures of this silly maroon van sitting out there. Now, why do I suggest that's evidence, if you will, of Steve behaving like an innocent guy would behave? Well, if you're going to lure the photographer to your property so you can have your evil way with her and kill her, you don't need a car. You don't need anything for sale. You just lie and say, I want you to come out and take a picture of a 73 Eldorado or, there's a van. It's the van he tells Auto Trader. It's owned by Barb Yonda. Just like he tells Auto Trader, B Yonda, and gives B Yonda's telephone number. Turns out there's no dispute, of which I'm aware. The Dassey boys, Scott Toddick, the people who know about this who testified, yeah, there's a van. It's sitting there. She's trying to sell it. It's hers. I think that's suggestive of innocent behavior, not of, luring or concocting some scheme so that you can murder somebody. Look again what he's doing in October and early November 2005 while he's still in his house. The guns over the bed. They hidden? Has he run off and burned them or asked his nephew to take them or thrown them in the bottom of a pond or something or even moved them to the spare bedroom? No. The guns are where they are. They're right where Willie Johnson left them. Did he crush the car? No. Did he empty the burn barrel? Try to hide, whatever's in the burn barrel? Did he melt the license plates? Did he get rid of the key that supposedly is found, next to the foot of his bed or across the way from the foot of his bed next to his desk? No. He doesn't do any of that. I don't think the key's there. But if you believe that it's there, if you believe it's there, then it's awfully incriminating. If you believe he put it there, but I don't know why he would keep the key and that key alone of all of Teresa Halbach's possessions if he has previously disconnected the battery so that the key won't work unless you reconnect the battery for some reason. And he's got a junkyard, for crying out loud. Leave the key in the trunk where the keys are for all the other junk vehicles, leave it in the ignition, put it in the grass, I don't know. Bring that and that alone to your bedroom. But in general, the behavior you're seeing from Stephen Avery on November 3 and November 4 is open, cooperative. Sure, you can search my house. Contrast it to the behavior of a George Zipperer, who's one of the other appointments Teresa has that afternoon. Uncooperative, hostile, dishonest with the police, won't let him in the house for a long time, even after he knows this young woman's missing. And you get this from, some of it from Joellen Zipperer and some of it from Detective Remacher. How about burning trash? The plastic smell, burning trash at about, give or take, 3:45 on Monday afternoon, Halloween. Well, that really sort of takes you to Bobby Dassey and Blaine Dassey and Lisa Buchner and John Lurquin to decide what burning trash means. If Bobby Dassey's right and Teresa Halbach's been there at 2:45, then burning trash at 3:45 with a plastic smell is potentially incriminating. Bob Fabian sees this, smells the plastic burning as well. That's potentially incriminating if Bobby's right. I'm wondering why Bob Fabian doesn't smell the quite distinctive odor of a burning tire, of rubber burning with black smoke pouring thickly out of the burn barrel if supposedly the tire is being used to burn the cell phone and the camera and the Palm Pilot. But setting that aside, to me there's a more fundamental problem with that. I don't think Bobby Dassey's right. Blaine Dassey has a good reason to know when he gets off the bus every day. It's 3:30 to 3:40. He comes home, Bobby's sleeping. Bobby's there, and he's sleeping. This is what his own brother remembers. More, the bus driver has a pretty good reason to know what time. She's driving the same route every afternoon, dropping off the same kids in the same place at about the same time every afternoon. She's no friend of Stephen Avery's. She's not connected to Stephen Avery. She's not coached. She's not trying to oversell what she remembers. But that's when she drops the Dassey boys off. And one of the days that week, either Halloween or Tuesday the 1st or Wednesday, November 2nd, she remembers seeing a female photographer taking pictures of a van. If facts are stubborn, as counsel says, then that's a pretty stubborn fact. Just because she's not overselling it, and she has no reason to want to care how this case comes out. So is it possible that some other female photographer was there on Tuesday, November 2nd, taking a picture of a van? No. Is it? Sure, it's possible, but even Investigator Wiegert concedes when pushed a little bit about that he doesn't have any information of another female photographer coming to take a picture of another van. So this is pretty reliable stuff, that Teresa's there at more like 3:30 or 3:40, not 2:45. John Lurquin sees a green SUV leaving. What does he care about Stephen Avery? For that matter, what does he really care about Teresa Halbach? He doesn't have a dog in this fight. What he has to do is sit and stare out the front windshield of his truck every day for half an hour at 3:30 to 4, quitting time, as he fills the LP truck. He's got nothing to do except look at the world. Filters out the school bus, filters out, the cars he sees coming and going every day. That's common sense. That makes sense. When something new goes by, it's not a heavily traveled road, he notices. Is he overselling the point? No. Can't say it's that SUV. Can't say it's a Toyota RAV4. Looks similar. Can't say who's driving it. Didn't see whether it turned right or left at the stop sign on Highway 147. He's not gilding the lily, so to speak. He's not overselling what he saw. So to me, you guys are the ones that matter, but to me, that's fairly reliable stuff. It's reported to the police, candidly, when they ask. Lisa Buchner, for that matter, goes up to the barricade that Saturday. Says, I have some information maybe you want. They interview her 2 days later, the following Monday, when it's fresh in mind, and she tells them what she knows. Tells them what she doesn't know, for that matter. So you know, you got Bobby stacked up against Blaine, Lisa Buchner, and John Lurquin. And it looks to me like the more probable time frame is 3:30-ish that she's there. And if that's so, then burning garbage in your burn barrel at 3:45 is just burning garbage in your burn barrel. It's innocent. Bob Fabian smells plastic. So what? It's a white plastic garbage bag that, you know, Blaine sees. And you got plastic in your garbage? You know, I'll bet you do, unless you live in town where you got a nice blue recycling tub or something and, you know, you separate that stuff out. But this doesn't look like much if the time frame is different than Bobby Dassey has it. So how about the 4:35 p.m. phone call to Teresa's cell phone? What my colleague referred to as the alibi phone call. And the state argues he's doing that to create an alibi because he knows that'll create a record on the cell phone bills, cell phone company records. Okay, all right. I mean, first of all, it makes the star 67 calls not very important because they're going to create a record too. And if he knows that 435 call is going to create a record, then he also knows that the 224 and the 233 call are going to create a record. I mean, but maybe more importantly than that, this isn't much of an alibi. It's a cell phone calling a cell phone. You could be anywhere. Doesn't place you in any particular, spot on the planet. It's not like you're at home in your kitchen because you called on your landline with a 6-foot cord, keeping you from going any farther. It's a cell phone. It's not a good alibi. It doesn't get you anywhere or suggest that it's guilty behavior. This call also, it draws more attention to you, not less. I mean, you are going to show up on the cell phone records. It is your cell phone you're using. No, this isn't something you do if you're trying to alibi yourself. But while we're looking at phone calls and moving through Steve's behavior on October 31, hey, there are two telephone calls the state hasn't talked much about yet, if at all. But they stipulated on this. They agreed. There are two phone calls from the Manitowoc County Jail to Stephen Avery's landline. He's got a cordless phone. It may even be in one of the pictures of the bedroom. So he can wander around. But it is a cordless landline phone, they've stipulated. These phone calls come in from his girlfriend, Jody, from the jail. First one's at 5:36 in the afternoon. 15 minutes of talking, tape recorded. Investigator Wiegertz listened to it. And then another one at 8:57 p.m. Tape recorded, been listened to by the police, 15 minutes long, talking to his girlfriend. This is what somebody who's in the process of burning a body is going to be doing? Are you kidding me? No. I mean, you think maybe you would have heard those tapes played if there'd been something incriminating or out of the ordinary about the 15-minute conversations with the girlfriend that night? Halloween night? It's more just evidence of everyday life doing what an innocent person might well be doing. And that's how October 31 comes to an end. Later that week, and Blaine Dassey tells you this. He didn't make a big point out of it, but he told you, and I want to remind you about it. Later that week, Steve Avery suggests to Blaine maybe he wants to invite some of his friends over for a bonfire at Steve's place. Blaine's in high school kids, bonfire. He makes the suggestion. It never happens. For what I don't even know that Blaine explained why, but it just, the bonfire never happens later in the week. But, if you had burned a body in your burn pit, or you even knew that there were bones in your burn pit, spread around, human remains, you can invite some high school kids over to have a bonfire and sit around the same burn area? I'm not. That doesn't seem to me that somebody who's guilty that's something he would do, an invitation he would extend to his nephew. A bunch of random high school kids come on over to my makeshift crematorium for a bonfire and stand around. What does he do here in terms of behaving like an innocent guy or not? Well, look at the witnesses we called on his behalf. Now, all walks of life, many fewer witnesses than the state called. But as I say, all walks of life, and what struck me at least about the folks who testified for you because we called them, is I thought to a person these folks were natural, they were real, they weren't swiveling in their chair to look at you and give you a talk as if they were, an old friend of yours every time they're asked a question. They're not advocating anything as far as I could pick up, or as I say, sort of selling you something, overselling something. They're candid on cross-examination just as they were. I thought at least that's what this group of people shared. Was I surprised that we had to call the bus driver rather than the state calling to help you with the time frame that afternoon? Yeah, I was surprised, but we did it since they didn't, and now you've got that information. But these people rang true to my ear, at least, and it's your ears that matter. So let me move to my second question. Can you believe the police? Can you believe the law enforcement folks who are so sure that Stephen Avery's guilty? What do you see about their behavior before they're on stage here? Look at what they say and do when they don't know that you're going to be listening and seeing. And start with Andrew Colburn, since I sort of started with him on November 3. He calls in, does a license check on Teresa Halbach's car. Says he thinks it was probably on November 3. Not sure, but probably November 3 that he did that. But remember, he's working on November 3, so he would have had his radio. And it's Detective Remacher who says ordinarily you'd use your radio when you're calling in a license check to dispatch. He uses his cell phone instead. The tape you heard is clearly a phone call, not a radio in. So I think it's probably more likely that this license check is November 4, when Sergeant Colburn acknowledges he was off. Didn't work on November 4. And you may remember, Mr. Kratz asked him, do you remember what you were doing on November 4, 2005? He says, yes, I do. I was off. I remember what I was doing. Doesn't tell you what he was doing, other than to deny he went to the Avery salvage yard or deny he had anything to do with planting evidence. But he is off. And I'm not going to play it for you again. It's in evidence, but let's see if this comes up. That's what you hear on the tape that we played. Lynn, dispatcher, hi Andy. Can you run Sam William Henry 582? See if it comes back to that, and then they start talking over each other. I can't make it out. You can listen to it if you want. And then she goes off on talking about needing a Spanish interpreter and chitty-chatting while she's doing the license check. She comes back and she confirms it's Teresa Halbach's license plate, the missing person. Sergeant Colburn says, 99 Toyota? And so on. Why is he doing that? Why is he doing that? Why is he calling in a license check on November 3 or November 4, whichever day it is? You can get that information from Investigator Wiegert, or if you want to call your dispatcher, ask your dispatcher. This sounds a lot like what road patrol officers do when they come across a stalled car, an abandoned car, a car where it shouldn't be. That's what this sounds like. Draw your own conclusions, obviously, like from any other piece of evidence. But what's important is he's doing this not on a witness stand. He's doing this when he doesn't know anybody's going to be seeing or hearing or evaluating it later. Move off Sergeant Colburn, but stay in the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department for the moment. Mr. Kratz argued to you yesterday that Special Agent Fossbender, starting November 5, devoted his resources where this thing was likely going. Where this thing was likely going. True. I guess he did, in the sense that it was certainly clear pretty quickly where this thing, this investigation, was going. In my opening and with Detective Remaker, we had a chance to hear at 11:30 in the morning on November 5, half an hour after the first police officers arrived at the Avery property there to see the concealed Toyota that the Sturms have found. Half an hour later, for you to hear, at a time when he wouldn't have known it, Manitowoc Detective Dennis Jacobs talking to his dispatcher. Can you tell me, do we have a body or anything yet? Dispatcher, I don't believe so. Very next thing he says, do we have Stephen Avery in custody, though? Yeah, it's pretty clear where this is going. By the time Special Agent Fossbender arrives, at 2:25, 3 hours later that afternoon almost, it's pretty clear where it's going. And 5 minutes after this one, conversation.
Signal for a break. So
Sure.
we're going to take a short break, and then we'll resume in 10 minutes.
Himself as someone who thought they were barking up the wrong tree, that Steve didn't do.
Please rise.
You may be seated. And Mr. Strang, you may resume.
Thank you. So 5 minutes later, 5 minutes after Detective Jacobs' call with the dispatcher, he's on the phone with Detective Remaker, or the radio, I don't remember now, but you've got the tape and evidence. Of course, Detective Remaker does testify, and you may remember him trying to present himself as someone who thought they were barking up the wrong tree, that Steve didn't do this, when he testifies. That morning, just about an hour after the Sturms had first found the Toyota. Okay, other than the car, do we have anything else? Not yet. Okay, is he in custody? Detective Remaker. It's not. Who are you talking about? Who do you mean by he? Negative. Nothing yet. One pronoun, he. And these guys know who they're talking about at 11:35 in the morning. Are these folks acting in a way that seems good faith and honest to you back then? 6 days after this, Special Agent Fassbender makes the telephone call to Sherry Culhane at the crime lab, try to give her some direction. And, now she's holding herself out as a scientist. That's how she holds herself out. Is Special Agent Fassbender asking for science? On the exhibit that Mr. Bunin showed you? Is he asking for science there? For a good, cautious, objective, let's see where the science leads us kind of thing, when he's asking, try to put her in his house or garage? It's not a very good fit, in my view, with the state's counsel's argument here that when they submit evidence, they're not looking for a specific answer. Oh, really? The memo belies that. The phone memo does. And Sherry Culhane on the stand herself tells you that by the time these buccal swabs are taken in November 2005 from all kinds of people other than Stephen Avery, members of his family, these are elimination samples. Elimination samples. We've already decided they didn't do it. We're just trying to eliminate if we find their DNA anywhere. Sherry Culhane, for that matter, had she followed the protocol on her testing. The bottom line, folks, had she followed her protocol on testing of that bullet found in March, she can't say it's Teresa Halbach's DNA. First time in her career, 23 years, first time on the last chance to put Teresa Halbach in his house or garage, she deviates from the protocol and includes Teresa Halbach. Now, it was just the control that was contaminated. It was just Sherry Culhane's DNA. That doesn't turn the evidentiary sample into having Teresa Halbach's DNA. Okay, all right, fine. But the protocol presumably is there for a reason. Protocols are the foundation of good science. And the protocol says if you've got contamination, you set that experiment aside and you do it again. You don't rely on that one. Science ought to be reliable. It ought to be consistent, and it ought to be cautious. Otherwise, it's not science. And the results simply aren't reliable. That's why you have a control. And when you get contamination, you now know that something has gone wrong with this. And to say that the contamination's over here but not over here is a little like saying, I don't know, maybe no one even eats TV dinners anymore. Maybe they're microwave dinners now, I guess. I mean, from what I see in the grocery store, but whatever, however you heat this stuff up, when you pull off the plastic or the tin or whatever covers the meal, you know, and the little peach cobbler has a fly in it, in that little compartment, you don't eat the Salisbury steak either. Okay? You know, I mean, this is not fancy stuff in the end. It is and should be common sense at some level in the end. But she deviates for the first time in 23 years. The end, this continues, the end of January 2007, bringing us up to 6 weeks ago. Now the state goes all the way to Virginia, to Quantico to get the FBI. Are they trying, is the FBI trying to root out possible police corruption? Are they concerned about the integrity of policing in northeastern Wisconsin? Trying to find out if there's a bad cop or not? I think the decision's already made. You have this too, Special Agent Gerald Mullen of the FBI, memo to the FBI laboratory this January 30th.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I believe the defense is entitled to one closing. Mr. Buting covered exactly the same territory yesterday. I understand that they were going to split and talk about different items. I simply wanted to interpose that objection. My apology to counsel, but that was my understanding with the court.
I'd be more concerned about boring you. Mr. Buting did cover it. It's there. But I want to say something about EDTA that Mr. Buting did not. Janine Arvizu, who's not a doctor. Mr. Buting misspoke. She didn't complete her dissertation. She did the other PhD work. I want to make sure you got out of that what she had to tell you. And it's this. The FBI protocol that they put together in a couple of weeks here is good for identifying and confirming the presence of EDTA. It is not designed for confirming the absence of EDTA. And it has to do with the detection limits. Now, the instrument has a detection limit and the method has a detection limit. So, look, if you were interested in finding out whether your friend is at home and the instrument you chose was a telephone, you're going to call him at his house, ring his telephone number. If he answers the phone, you've confirmed his presence with your instrument. He's there. You've called his home, not his cell phone. He's there. It's got to be if he's answering his phone. You've confirmed his presence. However, if your instrument is your telephone and you call his home and it just rings and rings and it's not answered, you have not confirmed his absence. He could be in the shower. He could be in the basement folding the laundry. He could be in bed sleeping. He could be pouting and just not answering the phone because he sees it's you calling on the caller ID and he doesn't want to talk to you today. Whatever it is, you haven't confirmed his absence with the telephone. You haven't designed a protocol to get you to that. Your method, in other words, of detection isn't suited to confirming absence, only presence. If you like fresh-baked hot apple pie, and I put you in a room and I blindfold you, and we walk in a fresh-baked hot apple pie, your nose is the instrument. It has a detection limit. A dog has a better instrument, lower detection limit, fancier instrument. He can detect less of the smell of apple pie than you can. But you've got this instrument to use. If it's within your detection limits and the pie is, slid on the table under you while you're blindfolded, you'll detect it with your instrument. However, if the method's no good, because we've got to consider that, you're not smelling an apple pie, well, is the room too big? Are the windows open? Is the pie too far away? Does the room smell badly of something else that's interfering with your instrument detecting the fresh-baked apple pie? We have method detection problems and limits. Or is the apple pie not fresh-baked, but it's an 11-year-old apple pie? You may not detect that either with your instrument. I don't think Janine Arvizu was really telling you more than that. And unfortunately, Dr. LeBeau was trying to tell you more than that and overselling his case. Now, others who matter in the law enforcement group who think Steve's guilty. Mr. Lincoln, Mr. Colburn. They denied here, of course. But what are they doing? In 2002, when the evidence slip has to be signed for transmission of the hair sample and fingernail clippings or whatever it is to the crime lab, and the evidence custodian at the time, Detective Sergeant James Link, signs off. Is he really, as he claims here, simply signing the form, giving it to Sergeant Shalhoub, and allowing Sergeant Shalhoub to fill out the otherwise blank form? You're entitled to disbelieve that. Or at least to say he's not an honest evidence custodian if he's doing that at the time. He's begging to be fired because he's not documenting what's going where. Or if he's just telling you here to distance himself from that file in the clerk's office, you're entitled to consider that too. Would Lieutenant Link lie in the end? Would he lie as a sworn law enforcement officer? Well, all I can tell you is he did twice, and you heard it. I had the transcript from the earlier hearing. Here he says he arrives at 2 o'clock. When he's asked under oath before, it's 6:30 or 7. Once when he's asked, and the other time he's asked, it's late afternoon. This isn't 15 minutes off, folks. It's under oath, and it's a difference of 4.5 or 5 hours. At that time of year, November 2005, it's the difference between broad daylight and pitch black. He was under oath. And he gave 2 very different answers to the same question at 2 different times under oath. he was the only witness in 5 weeks shown to have made inconsistent statements under oath. Others made inconsistent statements and were shown to have. Blaine Dassey comes to mind, Scott Toddick comes to mind. Both of them, they're asked at first by the police, was there a bonfire on Halloween? No bonfire. Later, they get asked again. Now there's a bonfire. In fact, Scott Toddick comes here and says, big bonfire, flames to the top of the roof. Same guy, again, I showed when first asked by the police, no bonfire. Closer in time to October 31, no, didn't see bonfire that night. That's inconsistent statements, but they're not under oath. They still, as the judge instructed you yesterday, are something you can consider. Consistency or inconsistency of a witness's statements over time. Still, you can consider those when you decide who you believe. They're not under oath. Blaine explained that a little bit. Explained his changes of his story while the police kept asking him. They didn't like the answer, they asked him again. Got angry with him and his mother at the restaurant when they wouldn't reject Uncle Steve. Was that because Blaine's scared of Uncle Steve? Well, my recollection, yours will govern. There's 12 of you and 1 of me, but my recollection of that testimony is that the question was whether Blaine Dassey was scared, and the answer was something like, no, not really, but he used to boss us around. You'll decide that. But in any event, Lieutenant Link, by the time he gets to you folks, is telling you some really implausible things. Like, I'd never been to Stephen Avery's house, I'd never been on the Avery property, but somehow, just out of habit, I turned right at the end of Avery Road, and I just happened to drive straight to Stephen Avery's trailer. Okay. So this, what they're doing, and whether you think you can trust them back when they're not aware they're going to be observed or revealed later, is important in the same way what he does back before he knows it's going to be played out to you is important in assessing who you believe. Are they acting honestly? Is he acting like an innocent person would act or might act? This is important because it comes down to the bias in the end. Would in the end police officers plant evidence? And that's a hard one. That's why it's helpful to say, boy, are they behaving honestly and in good faith up to them? Because in the end, would they plant evidence against someone? Now, you'll have to decide whether you have a reasonable doubt about that, or whether we've shown that to you at any level or not. But look, it is a matter of bias if it happened. And what you critically, I think, need to understand, that if and when police officers plant evidence, they are not doing it to frame an innocent man. They're doing it because they believe the man guilty. They're not doing it to frame an innocent man. They're doing it to ensure the conviction of someone they've decided is guilty. That's why you plant evidence, other than in the strangest, most abandoned of conscience sort of police officer. They aren't after framing an innocent person. They're after ensuring the conviction of someone they just believe is guilty. So as you approach the whole concept of planting, you've got to understand the bias that would drive it. Not, boy, they're out to get an innocent guy. It's just the opposite. It's just the opposite. But it's also just as corrosive to do it, because juries decide guilt, not police officers who are involved in the hunt. You know, they get invested too in the outcome and in whom they suspect, who they think is good for something. And, you know, the state poo-poos the idea that a civil lawsuit for a whole lot of money against the Manitowoc Sheriff's Department would have caused anyone to so dislike Stephen Avery that they would plant evidence against him. Well, look what the mere suggestion that they did plant evidence has done in terms of a reaction here. The defensiveness of the case that the state presented to you, the anger about the mere suggestion of planting evidence, the self-righteousness, the hostility, the trying to have it both ways with you. We trusted the Manitowoc people. They were skilled. They were honest. They were the best available evidence technicians. But we also had somebody watching them. We were short of manpower. We needed them. But in the first search of Stephen Avery's, the first lengthy search of Stephen Avery's house on the evening of November 5, we got enough people that two of them can be taking photos. Two of them can be taking photos in this little trailer, as you heard. You hear the state trying to have it both ways here. And in sort of getting at the bias that would drive a police officer potentially to plant evidence, it's this need, this belief that he's not really innocent. He's guilty. He's got to be guilty. It's what you hear from Detective Jacobs and Detective Remacher. It's that quality. It's the sense that this is where this is going 3 hours in when all we've got is the car on a big property with a whole lot of other people there. It's the, after 5 weeks of evidence and 501 exhibits, it's the state standing up and telling you it's clear. What in the world is 5 weeks and 501 exhibits to try to show it? I mean, whatever this is, whichever way you come out, this case isn't clear and simple. And that's where the civil lawsuit feeds in. It's not that it feeds in with bad cops, it feeds in with good cops, in the sense that it erodes fundamentally the sense of identity. We get the bad guys. We don't get the good guys. And here it is, they got it wrong. That department got it wrong. Not only do they get it wrong, but the right guy is still out there, and he commits another rape. Gregory Allen. This goes to my identity if I wear that same uniform. Even if I'm allied with these people, as you hear this sort of reaction from the prosecutors to this. And now, you know, since he really couldn't have been that innocent, he's got to be guilty of this one. He must be the right guy this time. So you know, nobody means to do this, but you start looking around things that are inconvenient, that don't quite square up with the theory that he did it. One example and one example only for the moment. The Teresa Halbach's blood in her own car. If it were true, as the state now says, that Stephen Avery shot Teresa Halbach in his own garage, killed her there, and if it were true that he then burned her in the area immediately behind the garage, why is her bloody head ever in the Toyota at all? It's farther to take her back to her car than it is to take her around the corner of your garage to the burn site, if that's what it is. So the state sort of ignores the fact that if Steve Avery had done it and done it in the way they say, her blood wouldn't be in the car. The bloody hair stain wouldn't be there. It is there, of course. So it suggests that somebody did have to use the car as a transport. She wasn't burned there or wasn't killed there, but that's inconvenient. You guys have to be, in the end, if you're going to do what you can do here, more objective than that. You can't overlook the inconvenient because it doesn't fit. You can't overlook, for example, in deciding whether Lieutenant Link dropped the key on the floor rather than finding it honestly, you can't overlook the fact that all her other keys aren't on it. The 3 or 4 other keys that Tom Pierce described and that your common sense would tell you would be on your key ring, they're not there. It's the kind of thing, it's inconvenient, but you can't overlook it, even if they do. The overlooking of the inconvenient really, I think, reaches its peak, if you will, here in the state's opening statement, where knowing that human bone fragments are found at least in the burn barrel, a long way from the burn area behind Steve's garage, and maybe in the quarry to the south. Knowing, in other words, that their own experts will say, yeah, bones were moved here. The state never tells you in its opening statement there's a second place and maybe even a third where human bone fragments, burnt human bone fragments, are found. And we have no evidence that it's more than one person. You don't get told that. It's inconvenient. But it also is true. And that's why, in the end, it does become so important to decide burned here and a few moved elsewhere, or burned somewhere else, and most of them dumped here behind Avery's garage. That's why that says so much about his guilt or innocence in the end. Look, I got to sit down, which no defense lawyer ever likes to do, because in closing argument, because the prosecution gets to stand back up. In a sense, they get the last word in closing argument. I'm not going to get to answer the passion or the anger or the replies that will come when I sit down. I got to turn him over to you and let them have the last word. And as hard as that is on me, the greater burden is on you. The greater burden is on you. Because you've got to try to do the things you can do here, and you've got to find a way to live with the things you can't do, but would like to do here. You got the great burden of reaching a just, fair, and conscientious decision. And so, in a sense, in a sense, I'm going to rely on Judge Willis to give my rebuttal to their rebuttal, in a sense. Because I think he will tell you, when all is said and done, that you won't be swayed by sympathy, prejudice, or passion. And I think that will be an answer to what's about to come. I think he will, Judge Willis will, I think, in the end, tell you, charge you to be very careful and deliberate in weighing the evidence and to keep your duty steadfastly. And that will be sufficient answer for me to what's about to come. So I ask you, please, give it your full and fair consideration. Do that critically here as citizens of Manitowoc County, where we stayed to pick a jury, where we stayed to pick the 12 of you, the 13 of you, and get it right. Get it right. Stephen Avery has not been proved guilty of murdering or mutilating the corpse of Teresa Halbach. He's not been proved guilty of that beyond a reasonable doubt. It's because he's not guilty. And that's what I'm asking you to say in getting it right.
Members of the jury, as counsel indicated, there's one more argument. The state gets a chance for rebuttal. I'm going to take a 10-minute break at this time. Then we'll come back to hear the state's argument, and I'll give you final instructions. Again, as I reminded you yesterday, because the arguments are not complete yet, do not begin your deliberations until all the arguments have been made, and I give you final instructions. You may be seated. Counsel, I'll see you back at 11.